So what we've seen in the past week is the most extraordinary hysterics and manic behaviour, all to do with the fact that Donald Trump did what every president is ever supposed to do, which is try and have cordial relationships with Russia. But it went off the chart, and we've seen now what's commonly referred to as Trump derangement syndrome. But there's real hatred. It's ugly, it's nasty, and it's very, very dangerous. We're seeing, for example, in shop windows in America, they have photos of Trump being decapitated. We saw in the march in London, people holding up decapitated heads of Donald Trump. This all began with a so-called comedian, Kathy Griffin, last year holding up a decapitated Trump. We've seen T-shirts with decapitated Trumps. It is so nasty, it is so ugly, and it has got to stop. But the problem is that the left are so outraged by the successes of Donald Trump. They are impotent in their rage. Sidney Powell, writing in the Daily Caller, has described this syndrome. The incoherent rage is because power is the only thing that leftists worship. And they are unraveling in front of our eyes because they don't have any power. They cannot control Mr. Trump. As Ross often mentions, the deep state. They tried to control Donald Trump through the deep state, and they are failing, continually failing. That alone drives the left insane. The left have no policies that work. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is coming up with a suite of policies that do work. Look at the successes of unemployment and so on. But the writer goes on to say that each of President Trump's accomplishments, from unprecedented high employment, the booming economy, low unemployment for blacks, for women, for Hispanics, tax cuts, etc., the Kim Jong-un summit, all these successes highlight the failures of the left. And this is what is driving them so insane. Even here in Australia, we're seeing so-called conservative or centre-right commentators frothing at the mouth about Donald Trump and how dreadful he is and how useless he is. There was one newspaper saying that we have to have a serious talk about Donald Trump, how disastrous he is. So what you're not actually seeing in the media, what you're not seeing is the other side of the story. So we saw all the photos of that silly balloon thing, that Trump balloon in London. What the media didn't show you was this, the pro-Trump demonstrations in London. Let's have a look.
We love Trump! We love Trump! We love Trump! Mr. President, if you are seeing this, just know that the great deplorables of the United Kingdom love you, we are with you, we stand with you, and we want you to succeed. Forget about the people in London, forget about the establishment, forget about the detractors in the fake news media. The real people out there in the United Kingdom, we love you, Mr. President!
So the real average mainstream conservative people in Britain, in Australia, and America appreciate what Trump is doing and are baffled by this war against him by not only the left and their vile hatred, but also mainstream commentators who are portraying the president as this some kind of weird loose cannon. But let's have a listen to what do people, real Americans, think about Donald Trump? Real people like you and me sitting around having a picnic talking about Trump. Let's have a listen.
Where I'm supposed to change my opinion about a president that's doing all kinds of amazingly positive things because of a one-hour press conference.
It's a swamp screaming. It's a swamp being Chicken Little, the sky's falling in. And the American people are getting tired of it.
But you've got Republicans criticizing President Trump.
Those are never Trumpers. And you know what? We love when Trump is Trump because it exposes them, and we love that. We love seeing it.
We can focus on what Trump says in a press conference, or we can focus on what he actually does.
Yes.
And he's put people back to work. Record low unemployment for Hispanics, for African Americans, record high employment for the whole country.
So we saw all this idea that Trump had somehow cozied up to Putin and that he was being too friendly with Vladimir Putin and this was the worst thing that could possibly happen, despite the fact that we had, when Tony Abbott threatened to shirt front Putin a couple of years ago in Brisbane, all the left screamed, how they screamed, what a gauche idiot, he doesn't know how to do diplomacy on the world stage. So they attacked Abbott on the one hand for wanting to shirt front Putin correctly over MH17, but then they turn on Trump for putting that issue to one side temporarily while we talk about relationships between our countries, between America and Russia being better. I'll just read you Donald Trump's tweet where he says, "I got severely criticised by the fake news media for being too nice to President Putin. In the old days, they would call that diplomacy. If I was loud and vicious, I would have been criticised for being too tough. Remember that when they said I was too tough with Chairman Kim? Hypocrites." So let's just have a look at this image showing all the previous presidents and individuals who have cozied up to Vladimir Putin. Just have a look. Here we have at the top, you see Bill Clinton with Vladimir Putin. Yep, that gets the big tick. You have George W. Bush with Vladimir Putin. Big tick. That's Charles Schumer there, who's criticising Trump like crazy for being too close to Putin. He was close to Putin. Big tick. There we have Hillary Clinton cozying up to Putin. Big tick. There we have Barack Obama cozying up to Putin. Big tick. Oh, but Donald Trump says some nice words, has a press conference with Vladimir Putin. Oh, terrible, evil, what a dreadful man. This is a joke. Ross, what's happening with this insanity that we're seeing from the left, Ross?
Yeah, well, the former president, I think the first president of the liberated Czech Republic, was the poet, playwright, dissident Václav Havel. And he talked about how during the period of Soviet occupation, how there were these two different dialogues taking place. There was the official speak, which took place on newspapers, the radio, and between sort of bureaucrats. And then there was the language underneath that, the authentic, organic, real dialogue which took place between citizens. And indeed, when I come into Canberra, as I do now, it reminds me a bit of that movie Men in Black with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, where they had the neuralisers, and they would try, and they had the ability, they were sort of an agency looking after aliens on Earth, but without knowledge of humans. And so when humans saw them, they held up the neuraliser that wiped out the memory of the humans. And indeed, I find when you come into Canberra, there is sort of something, there's like a neuraliser that it wipes out the memory of all the ordinary citizens in the rest of Australia, and it causes people just to purely concentrate on the language of the bureaucracy and the interests of the bureaucracy. And that's what's happening here, that Donald Trump grows in the estimation of the ordinary American every day and every week. Donald Trump is going to smash the Democrats, I believe, not just in the midterms, but also in 2020, because he's delivering results, he is connecting, he has the interests of the ordinary American front and centre. And this guy and the Putin engagement is just one more example.
Ross, I want to read you a little bit by Matthew Paris, writing in The Times, which I think you'll enjoy. Matthew Paris, great commentator, normally fairly centre-leftish, but anyway, what he says is that Donald Trump doesn't care to think too much before he speaks and has a habit of saying what he thinks. Trump's right, isn't he, about the European end of NATO not pulling its weight in defence spending. He's right, isn't he, about the dangers of European reliance on Russian gas. He's right, isn't he, that China is not offering the world a level playing field in terms of trade. He's right, isn't he, that British politics is in turmoil, and he's right, isn't he, that Theresa May's Brexit proposals will turn the United Kingdom into an economic satellite of the EU. So here we have Donald Trump on the world stage continually pointing to massive problems, massive issues that the rest of the world has ignored for so long but spoken about, and yet that is ignored and they concentrate on some silly comment he made about not trusting the American intelligence community, which you wouldn't trust anyway if you look at their history.
Yes, and the satirist for the Australian Financial Review, I saw, wrote a beautiful column yesterday on that very subject about the record of the intelligence agencies just failing to provide intelligence on one major strategic challenge after another. And I think there is a kind of growing awareness that these agencies are a double-edged sword, and that with the advent in particular of what is described as counterintelligence, we find that you've got organisms within democracies which can simply go rogue and which can decouple from the interests of citizens and start serving their own institutional interests. And that's what we have seen in the senior leadership, for example, in the United States of the FBI, of the CIA, of the Department of Justice, of the what do we call it, the National Security Agency. We've seen the senior figures have all become deeply compromised, partisan, political activists. And the American people are looking on at this with a kind of astonishment. And I think what it has become clear is that a significant group of bureaucrats, both in the United States and in Australia, do regard the idea of democracy as a kind of window dressing. They see the citizen no longer as in charge and as the person that they are serving, but they see the job of the citizen as to serve the government.